We're going to be able to start. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to another session of MÉTIS Talks. My name is Nathalie Kermel. I'm a full professor in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta, but also the director of the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research, and I work in collaboration with Rhonda Ashmore, who is going to be our moderator today. So fall 2025 marks the 10-year anniversary for MÉTIS Talks. And before we begin, we would like to let you know that we are recording today's presentation. And we ask that everyone keep their video off and microphones muted. There will be time after each presentation for audience questions. I'd like also to remind people that the University of Alberta, its building, labs, and research stations are primarily located on the territory of the Nehea, Métis, Nakota, Dene, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, lands that are now known as part of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, and the homeland of the Métis. The University of Alberta respects the sovereignty, lands, histories, languages, knowledge systems, and cultures of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations. So for people who don't exactly know what the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research does, it was created in 2011, and it's a joint venture between the Métis, well, at the time, the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is today the Otipemisiwak Métis government, the Rupert's Land Institute, the Faculty of Native Studies, and the University of Alberta. Our CMR is housed in the Faculty of Native Studies and is an award-winning academic research program specifically geared toward uplifting Métis voices and perspectives. The goals and objectives of the Research Center include building provincial and national connections with Métis communities, increasing research capacity to advance Métis-specific research, and training and employing student researchers. And MÉTIS Talks are public events. In some ways, it's our flagship activity that occur in the fall and in the spring. And what we're trying to do is to highlight Métis-specific research, art and culture. And as I said earlier, we are marking a 10-year milestone of MÉTIS Talks. So happy anniversary to us. So the presentation format, today's topic we felt was very important due to some of the changes that we're seeing because of climate change, especially around wildfires and how they affect Métis communities, and along with practices and responses from the communities. We have three presentations. The first will be with Dr. Amy Cardinal Christensen, the second with Jacob Dudas, and the third from Dylan Turner. After each presentation, we will take questions. So we have a few ground rules when it comes to this. For your questions, please use the chat and direct the message to co-host Rhonda Ashmore by clicking on new chat button. So then you can include your questions, and Rhonda will be reading the questions to our presenters. So our first, we're really happy to have Dr. Amy Cardinal Christensen with us today. Amy is Métis and grew up in Treaty 8 territory. She's the Senior Fire Advisor for Indigenous Leadership and has a background in both research and fire operations. She worked with Indigenous nations across Canada on Indigenous fire stewardship practices like cultural burning, and collaborates with Indigenous peoples from all around the world on decolonizing land management. She also studies wildfire evacuations and advocates for Indigenous wildland firefighters. And our presentation today is Indigenous fire stewardship and Métis communities. So please welcome Amy. Amy, your turn. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Just grabbing my screen up here. Okay, are you able to see that on the full screen? Oh, maybe not yet.
Yes. Yes.
Thing.
Yes.
You can see it now. Good.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you so much for that introduction there. Yeah, I'm Amy. The group I work for is Indigenous Leadership Initiative. We're the only national Indigenous-led conservation group in Canada. And I think I just want to be clear, when we say conservation, we're not talking about old school conservation and those ideals of like, wilderness and things like that. What we're really passionate about as Indigenous people and our role in stewarding landscapes, and fire is one of the ways that we can do that. And so I'm just going to present an overview of kind of where we are with fire now in Canada, kind of where we've came from as Indigenous communities, and then, looking forward into the future at how we can improve our relationship. So for me, as they said, I'm a Métis woman. I am starting kind of now to identify it as Cree Métis. As many of you know, there's a lot of Métis politics at the moment. So one side of my family is the Labakan family. They're from the Red River in Manitoba. They came to Alberta and settled in the Labakan settlement. They were a group of buffalo hunters, and when they were forced out of the Red River. And so these are my grandma and her siblings in front of the sign kind of that marks their settlement. The other side of my family, so the mom of these guys was from the Cardinal family, actually. And so they're from a disenfranchised First Nation called Pieci-Span, which was by Lac La Biche. And after the Riel Rebellion, they were basically disenfranchised for their role in it. And many of them took scrip, which then led to them being designated as Métis people, according to the government. So anyways, it's a huge, long, complicated relationship. My family, though, is Cree speaking. We didn't speak Michif. So just noting that as well. And basically, my family were trappers. That's a lot of what they did. The woman in the middle there, that's my Auntie Alvina Strasberg, who's was a very famous advocate for child welfare in Métis communities. And when she had her first baby, it was actually out on the trap line, and she, had her baby and then dog sledded 2 hours to her mom's cabin. So I like to think I come from a long line of like resilient Indigenous women, especially who are very passionate about issues. And for me, I've gotten very passionate about fire and the role that Indigenous people can play. So I wanted to show this map of wildland fire evacuations in Canada. And this is from a paper that we published in 2024. And the map, basically, all the dots show evacuations that have occurred in Canada from wildfire over the last 42-year period. I should clarify, from 1980 to 2021. As you know, research is slow by the time we got this published, and we're hoping to update this soon because 23 and 25 were both very significant fire years as well. But the size of the dot basically is the number of people that were evacuated. So the larger dot, the more people that were evacuated. And what's really important about this map is that the orange dots represent Indigenous communities, so communities that have greater than 50% Indigenous population. You can see that it's spread from coast to coast to coast across Canada, in the interior of British Columbia, as well as the boreal forests throughout like the northern prairie provinces, is where we really see a lot of evacuations of Indigenous communities from fire. When we look at wildfire evacuations as well, about 5% of the population in the last census identified as Indigenous. Many of those folks are, urban settings. They don't live in Indigenous communities. There's a much smaller proportion of that. But of the people that do live in Indigenous communities, they make up about 42% of wildfire events that happen in Canada. So we're just so disproportionately overrepresented in the impacts of wildland fire. yet we're kept really out of management or any sort of decision making about fires that impact our territories. And this map here, there's very little writing, so don't like worry about the little writing. But what I wanted to show here was repeat evacuations that have happened. So the numbers are actually how many times a community has been evacuated from fire solely in that 42-year period. So there's 3 communities in Canada at that time that were evacuated 7 times. And Deer Lake, I think, is actually now up to 9. They were evacuated in 2023 and then last year as well. So again, we're just seeing almost all out of all of those communities represented there, only one, which is West Kelowna, is a non-Indigenous community. So again, just these repeated impacts over and over on Indigenous nations, yet we're really oftentimes, well, we're not given support on how to lessen the risk of these impacts on our communities. So we did a study, and we have an evacuation partnership called the First Nation Wildfire Evacuation Partnership, where we work with 200 First Nation evacuees across Canada in documenting their evacuation experiences. And I know many of you will be like, well, why didn't you include Métis communities? And we had a lot of discussion about this, but the one thing that's really important to point out is the difference in jurisdiction. So for First Nation communities, they're under federal jurisdiction, whereas for Métis communities, they're currently under provincial jurisdiction. And then emergency management, forestry, wildfire are all also under provincial jurisdiction. So when we started doing our research, what we found was that the second we included Métis communities, it just got so confusing because already evacuations are complex enough. And then when you add further jurisdictional rules on there, it increases the complication of evacuations as well. So this partnership really just studied First Nations, but I think that there's a lot of really important lessons in here for Métis communities as well. So what we've really found in that work and that study that we did, I mean, the partnership formed in 2013 and it's still active today. We're still doing research with communities. And we see the same things over and over again, that the vulnerability of communities is caused by colonization. So it's not caused by Indigenous people. We're not doing this to ourselves, where we're making ourselves more at risk to wildfire. It's literally because of systemic racist government policies that are impacting us. Healthcare is a very prime example, right? Where Indigenous people have a different jurisdiction for healthcare. When they're evacuated, there's so many complications that come into play just in healthcare alone and how people get support for that. So again, jurisdiction, as I've already ranted on enough about, there's a low levels of preparedness. Again, that is not our fault, but from significant underfunding from the government, which has an obligation through treaty and through the Constitution and other inherent rights to support us in terms of being prepared in our communities and being safe for these emergencies. Our communities have a lack of trust in agencies, which I think is well justified because of the colonial experience. So lots of times when communities are told to evacuate, now they won't listen. A lot of people stay behind, which is very common in evacuations, but they're often made to be scapegoats and other things. And you see the news stories of like those bad Indigenous people who stayed behind and weren't listening to the rules. And really it's because that our communities have knowledge about fire and that they want to stay and protect their communities because they don't trust that the agencies can do it. There's a remote evacuations that impact Indigenous communities. So there's many communities that are fly-in only. They have very small airstrips. If they even have an airstrip, lots of the airstrips are gravel. So it impacts the ability of planes and other things to land to evacuate communities. And then evacuations tend to be very long, unfortunately, because it's so difficult then to repatriate or to return people to those communities. There's the separation of families during evacuations. And so this often happens, you're in an emergency event, you have to get out. So sometimes families get split up. But what we've noticed through our studies is that there's very minimal effort to actually put families back together once the evacuation, once people are kind of in their host communities. And what we've seen, especially in the fly-in only communities, is that sometimes the families are separated by thousands of kilometers. Because sometimes they'll get on an airplane. One airplane will go to Winnipeg, Manitoba, another will go to Ottawa. It's just depending on where they're able to house the evacuees. And that creates a lot of issues because people don't have their support systems. There's new issues on top of old issues. So, issues with drug and alcohol addiction, other things like that, domestic violence, things like that, that then when are compounded with an emergency situation. And lots of what we found too is for the agencies, when people are repatriated or able to return home, the agencies just think like, okay, the evacuation event's over, everybody's home and they're happy. But what we've seen is that because of the devastation of these high severity fires on landscapes that, will affect generations and their ability to culturally use the land, is that, it's traumatic for people to return home as well. And there's also often very little support. So on the right there, you're gonna see a GIF go of like a fire, and so all the little yellow dots are hot spots. And so this is the Elephant Hill fire in the interior of British Columbia in 2017. And so this burned throughout the territory of the Skitchison Indian Band and the Ashcross Indian Band and other groups there. Really had devastating impacts. It burned for months. Had significant impacts on the watershed and other things. And you can just really see the growth of that fire moving throughout that entire area. And so we see this over and over again with these huge fires impacting Indigenous communities. So why are we seeing this? Well, lots of people blame climate change. And of course, climate change is a factor. We have great science that it's human caused. We know what's causing the change in climate. We know that we're seeing more lightning strikes. We're seeing longer fire seasons. We're seeing, hotter, drier periods of time, like the heat dome that happened in 2017 and 18 there. And what we're seeing also, though, is it's not only climate change, it's compounded on all these other factors of how our landscapes in Canada have been colonized and how Indigenous people have been removed. And so, there's our forests in Canada are fire dependent. Many depend on natural fires to be healthy. So not only Indigenous stewardship of territories, but also lightning caused fires. But we've excluded those from the environment through fire suppression campaigns. And so what we've seen is just massive landscape change. And I'm going to get into that and show you some pictures. We've also seen forest management practices that also make the land unhealthy through, the establishment of cut blocks. Like when I was growing up, we heard that, cut blocks replicated wildfire. And I think, that's one of the biggest lies that we were told out there, because really what's left behind is slash lots of times. Lots of times those areas get grass and other growths coming in that actually increases the risk to those areas, and again promotes kind of this monoculture of the forest that we see now. Interestingly, another thing that's really increased our risk is these wilderness or conservation movements. So this whole idea of like, we shouldn't do anything to the forest. We should let the forest be natural, and the removal of Indigenous stewardship from these areas. When you combine that with fire exclusion, unfortunately, it's created these really unhealthy forests. Expanding the wildland urban interface. So that's basically where homes intermingle with the forest. We've seen population growth in Canada, and many people want to live in those areas. And about 60% of First Nation reserves are located within or intersect that area. So, there's nothing that those communities can do about it. That's where their land is. They, have kind of inherited that risk through the establishment of the reserves, and similar to like the Métis settlements in Alberta and where they're located. So one thing that we have in Canada is we have a lot of Indigenous wildland firefighters. So I'll speak a bit about, how fire was taken from us. But after that happened, a lot of Indigenous people first were forced and then took careers in wildland firefighting and did an amazing job. Really were some of the great folks out there who were tending the forest and helping prevent fires from impacting communities. And so we did a study on called Giving Voice to Cultural Safety of Indigenous Wildland Firefighters, because many of those firefighters are kept in entry-level positions in firefighting. And so even though they're highly knowledgeable because of the systemic racism that exists, they're often kept in entry-level roles where they're not actually able to like impact higher level decision making about our territories. And what we also found in that study was that over 70% of Indigenous wildland firefighters have experienced racism, discrimination, or harassment on the fire line, which, for any other industry would be like horrific, really results. And so we're really trying to work to change that and to advocate for Indigenous wildland firefighters. So Indigenous knowledge systems have been proven over and over again that our ways of stewardship, we steward biodiversity, and I put a bunch of different study links in there. Again, these Western science studies, and for me, it's always frustrating because I don't know why they can't just believe our elders or Indigenous knowledge systems. It always has to be proven by Western science. But anyways, there's a bunch there. There's also that our knowledge systems provide nature-based solutions for climate change. And also, especially with fire, we really, through our knowledge, reduce the risk of disasters to our communities as well. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit and how Indigenous fire stewardship does that. So when I'm saying Indigenous fire stewardship, we're basically talking about any activity where Indigenous people assert their rights over stewardship of fire in their territories. So, lots of people immediately go to cultural burning and the, ancestral activities that we used to do on the land. It's much more than that. It's really having Indigenous-led decision-making over values protection, over how to fight a fire, Indigenous-led community preparedness projects, having Indigenous-led firefighting teams, and Indigenous-led emergency management as well is really, all the components of Indigenous fire stewardship. People are always very interested in Indigenous cultural burning, and it's really, where Indigenous people sought to replace fires of chance with fires of choice. And I think that's a really good way to put it. So it's basically putting fire on the land when we wanted it, in the ways we wanted it, where we wanted it, compared to just like waiting and seeing what happened from lightning. And when I started working in this field, elders would always speak to me about this cleaning the land, that was what was really important, was this need. Right now, the land was unhealthy and we needed to clean the land. And so the main reason that Indigenous people, including Métis people, put fire on the land in Canada was to achieve specific cultural objectives. So it wasn't specifically for reducing wildfire risk from out of control fires, but that was definitely a nice side benefit of the work that we did in burning, in the early spring or the late fall, when it was much easier to control the fires. And so one elder from the north said, I didn't set the forest on fire just for the sake of burning, but so that I could return to hunt the next year and live. And so I was just going to show some quick videos, and I don't know if somebody can give me a thumbs up or just that you hear the audio. I'm hoping that I selected the right button there.
The boreal region is a fire-adapted forest. The plants and trees need fire to be healthy. But what we see right now are the bad fires that are impacting people and livelihoods. It doesn't have to be something that we live in fear of every summer. You can have a better relationship with fire, and that's by using good fire on the land. Bad fires on the landscape. They're burning at often the hottest, driest, windiest times of the year. After big fires like that, we often find areas where trees aren't growing back. There's no animals because there's no life to sustain them. So it's very worrying, especially for Indigenous people who depend on those landscapes for culture. When we're talking about good fire, we're talking about putting fires where we want, when we want, for reasons that we want. We're burning in the spring or the fall when it's cooler, there's more humidity in the air. The fires can't get that hot. So it removes dead, dry, unhealthy vegetation from the landscape, but it leaves the roots completely intact so the plants are able to resprout quickly. You see increases in biodiversity and the types of plants, medicines, types of animals coming to those areas. It also reduces fire risk. We see a huge role here for guardians on the landscape across Canada. They can put fires on that are under control, that we can achieve different benefits from. We have to think about that relationship with fire. That's that cultural burning idea that once we've put the good fire on the ground, even the bad fires can be better.
So I like to show that video just because it really—
the boreal region is a fire adapted forest.
It really shows what fires actually, you know, cultural fire looks like. Lots of times when I get questions from people, they will say because people are scared of fire, and rightly so. It's had devastating impacts on communities. And so, you know, when they hear us say fire, it's just their first thing is that's dangerous. We shouldn't do it. But, you know, the more that we show people what fire actually looks like and the benefits that it can have, the more accepting they are. And I've had people, after I've shown videos of good fire, where they come up to me and say, "Oh, is that all you want to do? That's fine. Go ahead and do it." And so that's why it's important. So I wanted to show too this video. Sorry if I can get off of this screen here. This is a group in Cumberland House. And so this is a Cree Métis group. The Carrier family you'll see in here is one, and they have a project called Muskrats to Moose. And so I wanted to feature them too, to show some Métis communities who are actively burning on the landscape right now. Again, it's just another really short video.
I have lived here in this area my whole life. Something that my parents instilled in me from a very young age is that fire is a tool to manage the land.
When I was a kid, it was so rich with life. My father taught me these methods of trying to give back the land by burning unwanted weeds, so we could try to bring back the good plants that muskrats and moose and elk, deer need. And now we don't have that.
Indigenous people had these intricate systems of managing and planning fire, but the government has continued to interfere with the sovereignty in managing our own lands.
My girl, Michaela, and my family were always questioning why the muskrats aren't here anymore. And we had a colleague suggest that we do our own scientific study. So we did that, and in those 4 lakes, we burned half the lake, and we didn't burn the other half. When we went back in the fall and took samples, we found that where we didn't burn, there's primarily 4 plant species. And most in that area were grasses that are not used by animals. In the spring, when we harvested muskrat on both sides, on the non-burned side, the muskrats were 700 to 900 grams. And on the burnt side, they were 1,600 grams to 1,800 grams. So within just one season, you could tell that the burnt areas were quite productive because of how big the muskrats were. So that kind of convinced us to bring back the practice, to burn the land, to revitalize it. I seen it work.
Today, when I was lighting the torch and burning the grasses, that felt like carrying on the torch of my ancestors. So it was a really cool, powerful moment to take this ancient system, this ancient knowledge, and apply it to the land.
It makes me feel very good because I'm now carrying on the practice that my father taught me, and I'm able to share it with other people, that hopefully in the future that we continue this practice.
This project started pretty small, it was mainly just about the muskrats, and now it's actually gained momentum, and now we're actually teaching other Indigenous communities about these methods. It's not just going to be us, it's going to be a whole network.
So I'll try to get off this. So the other thing I just wanted to mention there about Métis cultural fire practices, the one that I think is, my family was bison hunters. They used to drive the buffalo using fire, right? And so that was one way that they would help them with the hunt. They used to use fire to kind of burn off the dead dry grass, which would then attract the buffalo to that area, so they didn't have to go as far to find them. And another thing was, after the harvest, that most people don't think about, it was really important to us to use all of the animal, right? So after the harvest was done, they would come back a few seasons later and reburn that area. And what would happen is all the white bone fragments and other things would stand out. And then they would go gather those and collect them, because then they could use them for different tools and other things. So there's really a long relationship that many Métis groups have with fire. And so I just wanted to, I'm not going to get too much into this just because of time, but basically Indigenous cultural fire, like what I'm speaking about, is much different than agency prescribed fires that wildfire agencies do. So, they're both beneficial, they're both important on the landscape, but I'm starting to say, like, it's like comparing apples and oranges, right? Like, it's really two distinct different practices. And cultural fire is Indigenous led around cultural objectives. We follow Indigenous governance systems. Is generally cool burns. And yeah, again, it's for cultural and spiritual ceremonial aspects. Whereas for prescribed fire with agencies, it's a much different reason that they burn, a much different way that they burn, which is often like following paramilitary structures, using helicopters, accelerants, all sorts of things, and trying to what we call production burning, burn as much as you can in as little time as possible, which is really the exact opposite of Indigenous fire. So just to show some like kind of more modern, so on the left is a picture from the provincial archives showing the Blackfoot tribe actually starting a fire, basically demonstrating a prairie fire start in 1903. And so you see this picture a lot that people use when talking about fire and Indigenous fire use. But what I'm most proud of is on the right, is that's the new Blood Tribe Fire Guardian crew. So it's basically people who, are from the Blood Tribe, from the Blackfoot Confederacy, that have come together to form their own basically fire initiative group. And in that picture, I was there when they did returned fire to Standoff, which is a community on their reserve, for the first time since it had been outlawed. And so it was really exciting to be there and see, that this new approach to fire and bringing back this practice that they've been banned from for doing for so long. The muskrats to moose video that I showed you featuring the Carrier family and other folks, they actually have a website. It's called wearefire.ca, and it's a very good, very informative website. You can go on and look at, what they're doing, what they call fire reconciliation. They have a great thing there called Understanding the Politics of Fire, where they go through all the different provincial policies and legislation that have stopped them from burning in their area. And one of the other really cool things about this website is it's all translated into Cree. So if you click, like I cut it off in this screenshot, but there's like a little audio button, and if you click it, there's a narrator that actually reads out the Cree to you as well. So people who might not be as comfortable reading can still listen to the website and the teachings there. So yeah, and a good way too if you're learning or practicing Cree to hear it too. So, whenever I present this, people are like, well, why the heck did we stop doing that if it was such like an important practice and so vital? And so really what we went through was this huge cultural severance in Canada after settlers came, where, they brought in all these fire policies, regulations, the Indian Act, other things that basically, like the script system, that disconnected Indigenous people from their land base. And one of those was by excluding fire. So telling Indigenous people that we weren't allowed to burn anymore. It became an illegal practice that people could be fined or jailed for carrying out. And actually in the US, in California, people were killed for trying to cultural burn. And so you can imagine being like a land steward working in your community, knowing, you need to burn an area, and suddenly someone comes and tells you like, no, that's wrong. You can't do that. You're actually harming the environment. You don't know what you're doing. And just the impact that would have had on people. So it was wildfire management agencies basically racialized our burning practices and through three key narratives. So discrediting, so that savage narrative that we didn't know what we were doing. They downplayed, like, well, how could Indigenous people steward these vast landscapes? Like they couldn't do that. Or the whole idea of terra nullius, that the land was empty and that it was theirs for the taking, and basically totally erasing Indigenous knowledge. So to give you an example here on the top, this is basically a land that's been stewarded by fire. So we can think of it almost as like a pre-settlement landscape. So in the foreground, you kind of see that light puff of smoke going up. That might be a cultural burn. You look and you see a lot of colors in the forest canopy, and you see what we call a mosaic landscape, where there's a lot of diversity in that picture. And in the far, you can see like maybe a lightning fire that started in the mountains, but it's not coming into the community because there's like, you can see down to the forest floor. There's not this overgrowth of like this monolithic forest. And that's what we really see in the middle pictures. We started suppressing fires and excluding them from the environment, and any fires that were happening, we're actively trying to put them out. And what we see is the change in the landscape is that, the forest starts to grow in, it starts to tend to be an older forest. So you get more conifer, like more spruce, more pine, more fir, those type of trees. You start losing the meadows and the diversity. And then on the bottom, we really get to that, monolithic forest where once a fire starts, it's very difficult once it gets into a crown fire in those pine and black spruce and white spruce trees. It's very difficult to stop those fires. And that's what's actually then starts to impact communities, and expect not only with direct fire impact, but also through smoke. So to give you some examples, these are from the Mountain Legacy Project. So back in the early 1900s, the Canadian Geologic Survey, went and set up cameras at all these different points and took pictures of the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. And so this is near where I am in Rocky Mountain House. And it just shows a picture from then when they, were photographing. And I don't think they knew what they were doing, but for us, it ended up being a documentation of massive landscape change. So if you go to the exact same spot now and try to take a picture, you cannot even see because the forest is grown in so much there. And again, trending towards that much higher risk forest for fire. And this is another example in the Rocky Mountain House area. When we look at it, like you see diversity in the forest. For example, if you lived, say, you had your settlement in the center of that frame, you would be able to like not travel far and be able to harvest a variety of cultural resources like berries or Labrador tea or, sage or mint or other things like that, kind of all in your area. You'd have, deer and moose and other things that were moving through to try and access those resources as well. But now when we look at that area, it's basically a monolith of monoculture forest, except for the highway. That's pretty much the only thing now that cuts it up. And what elders have told me, this is a hungry forest, because if you lived or settled in that area, you would have to go so far to find a diversity of resources. And so we wrote a paper called Centering Indigenous Voices, the Role of Fire in the Boreal Forest of North America. And for me, this was a really important paper because it was the first time we just only used Indigenous sources. So, not what people are telling us about what our fire knowledge was, but rather from Indigenous people. And so we put together a table of over 36 species in the boreal forest that were managed by Indigenous people with fire for our cultural purposes. And so you can find that table there as well as other stuff there. We have a book called Blazing the Trail, Celebrating Indigenous Fire Stewardship, and it's published on the Fire Smart Canada website. You can either download it there or ask them to mail you copies. And in there, it describes what Indigenous fire stewardship is, but there's also 11 different case studies, including various Métis groups that are using fire, using fire or doing different firefighting or other activities to protect their communities and get more healthy landscapes. We have a national initiative called the Thunderbird Collective that we've started that's contains Indigenous or all Indigenous people, so First Nations, Métis, and Inuit across Canada. It's a national working group on wildland fire. You can go to thunderbirdcollective.ca and check it out. If you're interested, our new website should be launching pretty soon. There is also a grant system there where communities can apply for grants to do this type of stewardship work on their territories. And so the current round just closed, but it will reopen again in February if people are interested, or if you're interested in getting involved with the Thunderbird Collective, there's an info page there and you can go and sign on to it. We also have a book that a workbook we just published called Creating a Cultural Burn Pathway for Your Community. And I think for me, the really important thing to mention here is that when I work with communities, lots of times they'll say like, well, I don't remember using cultural fire, and like neither do my grandparents, so we can't use it in our community. Or other people will just say, we didn't have a cultural fire tradition in our community. And that's fine. I used to kind of argue with people about like, well, if we look at like, your tree rings or this or that or other things, like we do know you use fire. But now, like what I say is, it doesn't matter if you don't remember it or if you didn't learn it. Like our knowledge doesn't only exist in the past. Indigenous people create new knowledge all the time. So if, in this era of climate change and this landscape of fire exclusion, if returning fire and creating a cultural burn practice for your community would help for you to steward healthy landscapes, would help to reduce your risk of wildfire, then it's your inherent right as Indigenous people to create that practice. And so that's one thing that this cultural burn pathways helps is it basically gives worksheets. There's no pan-Indigenous approach to cultural burning. Like you couldn't just come to my house here in Treaty 6 and I couldn't just like, I can show you how to burn here, but I don't really know how to burn in other places for their cultural values. And so this book is much more of like guiding questions for how communities can begin this process of, getting to know their own cultural practice around burning. I should say that it's available on the ILI website too, for free too. So there's lots of issues. Again, I have people say like, well, why aren't we just doing this? Like, this sounds really easy. And of course, like there's always issues. So there's very low recognition of Indigenous expertise related to fire. So when I'm like within our bubble of Indigenous fire experts, it's like, one world. And then when I go into like the broader community, it's like, wow, people really still don't understand about what we do. And there's, really big power dynamics at play. Fire is actually really become a huge like capitalistic enterprise. People make a lot of money off of the forest burning. And, nobody wants to give up power and nobody wants to give up funding. And so if you're giving that then or allowing space for Indigenous communities, they feel that it's at like a loss for themselves. Another thing too is that, with Indigenous communities, they have, for example, like on your reserve or your settlement, you could burn, but then the second you go onto Crown land, and you say that you're burning your territory, if the government then says to you, like, yes, sure, you can do that, that's basically them admitting that that's your territory, that that's your land. So it could become used in like these huge like land back lawsuits and, modern treaty agreements and other things that we're seeing develop. So that's also why, colonial governments are very cautious about it. There's also a lot of non-Indigenous interest and appropriation in our knowledge around cultural burning. And I get it all the time of people who, want to come and learn cultural fire and from us. And I always just say, that our youth need that opportunity first. They're the ones who this was taken away from, and that they should be our first priority when we're teaching. There's also no sustained funding in this area for Indigenous people. There's a lot of project funding. So these one-off projects where, we'll get a little bit of money to do one cultural burn, or, a little bit of money to do like a like emergency management plan. But what we really need is this program funding, right? Where fire, vegetation grows back, fires always come. So this isn't just something you can address once and move on. It's something that, is a continual thing for our communities. And in the end, it really comes down for me to social justice that, Indigenous people, this practice was ripped from us. We're now like really quickly realizing that that was something very wrong. And I feel that Indigenous people should be leading the change to get back to healthier landscapes. So if you're really interested in this topic, we have the Good Fire podcast. It's available on all podcast platforms. There's 3 seasons, basically where myself and others interview different Indigenous fire experts from around the world. The first season was with some Indigenous kind of academics. That was more the focus there. The second season, the fireback season, was with Indigenous practitioners who are out burning. The third season was all Indigenous women. So Indigenous women, and especially Métis women, played a very important role in fire, in deciding, where things burned, what burned, how techniques were around burning. So, we capture that. And then the fourth season is actually going to be a youth focused season, which I'm really excited. We're just starting to record it now. So I'm just going to quit there. I think I was only 5 minutes over, so hopefully that's okay. And I'll just pass it back to the hosts.
Thank you so much, Amy, for this presentation. I'm sure it's going to raise a few questions from our audience. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and Rhonda will read them to us. So thank you very much. Well, I may ask the first question. Like you did talk about Indigenous firefighters, and then also like the other side, with governments and the different jurisdiction. Is there any projects that are done in collaboration at all, or is it like really like people doing, like Indigenous firefighters doing their own thing, and then the government and other agencies doing their own thing? Or is there any potential for co-creation?
Yeah, so I mean, in fire, it's probably like everything. We see all types, right? So we see nations that don't want government involvement because of a history of trauma and other things there. They just want to express their sovereignty and their autonomy over their territory, and they want to do that through fire. We have other nations who basically I don't want to say do what the government tells them, but you know what I mean? Like they really use government resource and other things. So if they want to burn an area, like instead of doing it themselves, they'll just bring in or partner with the government crew to come in and do that work for them. We also have others where, like you said, it's much more of a co-created program where they're trying to learn together. And even the Blood Tribe example that I showed, when that initially started, that was a partnership between the Blood Tribe and Parks Canada, actually. And it kind of has evolved now into like a standalone initiative of the Blood Tribe. But I think that we're not alone on the land anymore. Like you have to have those really good positive partnerships to move these things forward. I think where I see my personal issue is that there's a tendency of government to push this like co-stewardship or co-management or other things where it's actually not, like, it's on paper or they say that, but then in actual practice, they're still the ones making the decision. So we might be at the table, but we're almost just there as advisors. We're there, the final decision holders. And I think what we really, with Indigenous Leadership Initiative, want to see is, Indigenous people there expressing their nationhood, and with governments there to support the work that they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like we think there's co-creation, but then there's always limitations to sometimes to that co-creation.
Yeah, and especially in fire, because fire is, like, as I said, people are scared of it. It is a risky thing, right? Like people who just walk out of their house and throw a match into dry grass, like even if they're in an Indigenous community, they're not a cultural burner. Like the way that we burn follows, in a proper way, follows our governance systems, right? It's like there's ways you burn, there's reasons you burn, there's things around burning in our governance that people need to follow. So it's just not really just like an anybody go out and do it. You need really good training and mentorship to be able to do that. And so that's one thing government also often uses over us, is saying, that like, they do it safer and they have more training and they have things like that. And that causes real issues for our community, because it's a really racist way of thinking. Like when we are doing planning for burns, like when we're thinking about doing a cultural burn, like we're planning, we're training, it's just in a different way than, like writing it all using like fancy acronyms and things that government use to plan their burns.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying, I wonder what got lost along the way, because if you're looking at some practices, let's say in Europe, there are burning practices, yes, on regular basis, and so I'm just wondering why suddenly, like when people came to settlers came, that these were kind of maybe not completely forgotten, because I remember I lived in Ontario a long time ago, and I remember that there were some burnings in some areas, like cultural burning. But I'm just wondering why, like, at one point, this shift, like in limiting, and I understand the colonial history. However, what got lost along the way by some of these settlers, I wonder.
Yeah, so for me, like it is a case of colonialism and settlers, but it's a bigger case of capitalism, if that
Oh,
makes sense. So when settlers came here, really what we see documented in their journals and other things like that is this vast timberscape. There was like so many trees that could be made money off of, furs, other things like that, right? And so when people came, a lot of it was that, why would you burn, something that you could sell in a way? And so for me, I think that that's where a lot of that came from, was because, yeah, they entered this, this landscape that they saw as being so healthy and untouched, where really what they were walking into was Indigenous stewarded landscapes, not only by our hand, but also by our relative lightning. And so it's really good to point out too, I think that there were almost all cultures have a history with fire. Like I've worked with people in Portugal that have burned like and so it's really neat. And I think, we need to kind of go back to that. Like, if you're not Indigenous from Canada, you're Indigenous from somewhere, and, to really kind of understand the relationship that you had with the land too, or that your ancestors had as well, and start to apply those principles.
yeah, thank you. I guess, Rhonda, we do have a question
We
in the.
do. Yes. So, hello. So, this is a two-part question. So, the first part is Dr. Cardinal Christensen mentioned that some people make a lot of money off of the forest burning. And Jennifer would like to know more about that. Could she explain a little further, please?
Sure. Yep. So as you know, well, I guess so. I guess the easiest way to answer this is just like if we look at a fire that happens. So there's been lots of studies that have come out, about how many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars Canada spends on fire every firefighting season. And so like when I was in fire operations, like I was at one camp where it was almost $2 million a day just to operate that camp. And so who do you have at the camp? You don't only have like the wildfire agency people, so the people who work for the province, but you have all sorts of private contractors. So like the people who set up those camps, the people who feed you at those camps, the people who clean those camps, the people who rent trucks to the firefighters, the people who, have dozers or, water haulers, all these other things. And like, I'm not saying that those people aren't important. Like, thank God that they're there when our communities are impacted by fire. But what it is that, there's only so much money to go around in fire. So what, would be a beautiful world is where we could still keep heavily investing in fire fighting, but also have the same amount of money in fire prevention. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Like, government's already cutting budgets and things like that. So that's why when we start talking about investing in Indigenous fire guardians or other things like that, people see it as a loss from what they're trying to do and where they think the need is. And you can understand that if you're a firefighter and you see fires every summer impacting communities, you want to invest in aircraft, you want to invest in, firefighting tools and things like that. But the problem is it gets us in this cycle where we're just constantly responding to fires. And because we're responding to them, we're excluding them from the environment, which is then creating more dead and dry vegetation, which then creates bigger fires. And then people make more money off those bigger fires. And so the cycle goes on, and we need something to break it.
All right, thank you for that. So the second part of the question was also for you. You mentioned that young non-Indigenous people should be careful about appropriation and filling spots that should go to young Indigenous people. I am a young non-Indigenous science student graduating soon, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on how they could get involved with Indigenous fire stewardship and support Indigenous voices.
Yeah, great question. So I think For me, I get the question a lot, and I wish, we were saying, like, everybody has like some history with fire ancestrally, like, you might be disconnected from it by centuries, but we all have that important thing. But I think for me, like, what I really see in Canada, where like non-Indigenous folks and the role that they can help play is in addressing like the kind of colonial systems and structures that we have in place. And that's really where I see the best allyship. So a lot of like my favorite allies that I personally work with, like Dr. Alex Sahara, Dr. Matthew Bornbay, all those people, they're ones who are actively working in their areas at trying to like dismantle like racist policies, basically. So like Alex basically researches the let it burn policy in northern Saskatchewan, which the Saskatchewan government says doesn't exist, but Alex has documentation that it does. And so, he takes on government and other agencies to try and encourage them to change policy, to change practice, to rewrite legislation, to rewrite acts. And that's really where I see really important allyship coming through. And then, with my other colleague, Matthew, who's at UBCO, he's forming the what is it called, the Canadian Prescribed Fire Training Center. And so, as I mentioned, prescribed fire is very important activity. But when he first got approached about it, it was like, of course, it should have a cultural fire component. And his pushback was like, no, if you want cultural fire, you need Indigenous people to do it. And so for me, that's also a super form of allyship, is like, having somebody that could just be there and take the money and say, yeah, my program's bigger, like stuff like that. But, he stood up and said, like, no, that's not right. Like, it should be Indigenous people leading this. So it's really where I see good allyship. Another thing is like, wildfire agencies, or like, I slam on them a bit, but they're also very important. Like I said, like, if your home is being threatened by a fire, you are so happy when those people show up. And I'm friends with a lot of firefighters that do very important work. So another thing, is supporting wildfire agencies in the work that they do, but also helping to open places for Indigenous people to be involved, in that kind of institutional complexity of wildfire agencies.
Thank you for that. Looks like we have one more question. What advice do you have for urban Métis who don't have a land base to relearn these practices? Is the best thing we can do advocate for communities that are being more affected by wildfire?
Yeah, another one like that's really interesting, especially like, so for me too, like when I talk to reporters and stuff, a lot like want to, I think, picture me, wandering around like in a diaper burning things or stuff like that. Like they always talk about like growing up burning. And I'm like, well, I didn't grow up burning. I was, my family, like most Métis families, experienced a disconnection from culture. Like I remember having cultural activities, but we never said it was Métis, and we lived as well in an urban area, and we weren't like, we didn't have land to tend or to steward. But, with me, what I've been doing is really trying to work with elders who are working on those practices, the people who are able to do that, who have opportunities to steward land. Another really big movement that I'm really proud of is like the IPCAs, so Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas. And I think that, as those start, I know that there's some interest in setting some up for Métis communities and other things. And for me, that would be a wonderful space too, for like urban Indigenous people to be able to go out and help to steward those areas too, so that you can have that connection to the land. And I think, advocacy is always helpful. Like even, and it doesn't have to be like big advocacy, where you're protesting or going and yelling at government ministers. It can literally be like, when you're sitting at the table and people are complaining about the wildfire smoke, you can say, well, there's Indigenous people used to have management practices that they'd use on the land that, where the forest was healthier, and they, we didn't have these summers of wildfire smoke. And so there's lots of, different things that you can do just in your daily life as well, to help us, so that we can have more people in this area.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you very much. Is there any more questions, Rhonda?
I think that is what we have at the moment.
Okay. Well, this is a great. The last question is a great segue to our next presentation. So our next presentation will be by Jacob Dudas. He has been working with the Otipemisiwak Métis government since May 2025 as the Emergency Management Assistant. He graduated from NATE in June 2024. Since joining the OMG, he has focused on the wildfire portfolio, developing programs, educational materials, and events to support and prepare Métis citizens. His work is centered on building community resilience and promoting proactive emergency management across the Métis Nation. His presentation title is Coping with Wildfires, Holistic Approaches for Métis Citizens within Alberta. Then Jacob's presentation will be followed by a presentation by Dylan Turner. Dylan Turner has spent the past 8 years with Rupert's Land Institute, contributing to its vision of building a skilled, knowledgeable, and self-reliant Métis nation. Throughout his tenure, he has taken on a variety of roles, focused on the design and delivery of programs that support the self-sufficiency and well-being of Alberta Métis through high-quality training initiatives. A proud citizen of the Otipemisiwak Métis government, Dylan has deep-rooted connections to the historic Métis settlements of Victoria and Lobstick, as well as ties to the Fort Saskatchewan and Lac La Biche communities. Currently, Dylan is focused on developing projects for Rupert's Land Institute, the Kiwichitinau Emergency Management Services, and his presentation title is Kiwichitinau, We Are Helping Others. So, Jacob, if you want to start, and then Dylan was followed.
Thank you for that. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jacob Dudas, and I have the great honor of being the Emergency Management Assistant with the Otipemisiwak Métis Government, Environment and Climate Change Department. I want to sincerely thank Rhonda and Natalie at the Rupert's Land Center of Métis Research for hosting today. Happy 10th anniversary of Métis Talks. I appreciate the opportunity to showcase the work that we do to support citizens through wildfires. Without further ado, welcome to my presentation. Let's begin with the 4 primary wildfire targets that we have focused on for the Métis Nation. As the departments responsible for environment and climate change, it is essential to raise awareness about climate change to ensure our efforts are directed towards sustainable practices and effective programming development. Specifically, improving public understanding of climate-related factors that increase wildfire risk and implementing preparedness measures that address them. Traditional Métis wildfire practices offer valuable insights into sustainable land management and community resilience. By integrating techniques honed over generations, such as cultural burns and an understanding of local ecosystems, we can enhance our current wildfire mitigation approaches while honoring Métis knowledge and preserving cultural heritage. Fostering land stewardship is a crucial responsibility we share, promoting sustainable practices that not only protect our natural resources, but also empower local communities. By encouraging sustainable land management practices, we can minimize fire risks, promote ecosystems, and ensure that our landscape remains resilient for future generations. Building community resilience is integral to our work, as their safety is our top priority in facing wildfire threats. By prioritizing preparedness, we ensure that communities are not only informed, but also equipped to respond effectively, ultimately reducing the impact of wildfires on lives and property. Our department conducted the Let's Get Prepared survey to gather citizens' experience regarding hazards and their impacts. The results indicate the number of citizens who experienced emergencies either directly or indirectly. This data informs the programming and resources that we develop and reinforce their direction. Over 90% of total respondents indicated that they experienced prolonged poor air quality as well as wildland fires and smoke. Additionally, almost all respondents reported experienced direct or indirect impacts on their health, with over half stating that these negatively affect their quality of life. This information emphasizes the crucial importance of addressing wildfire risk to ensure the safety of our communities and ecosystems. It also informs the work that we do. This data was directly used in our climate risk and vulnerability assessment, which I'll discuss now. The Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment, prepared in partnership with the Resilience Institute, is a vital report tailored for policymakers. This document lays the groundwork for understanding the climate change risks and vulnerabilities faced by the Otipemisiwak Métis government and our citizens. It represents a crucial first step in promoting culturally grounded adaptation planning and enhancing Métis climate leadership within the MNA homeland. The creation of this report was grounded in key values that shaped its development. Collaboration with the Resilience Institute ensured that multiple perspectives and expertise were brought together. The approach was community-driven, prioritizing the voices and needs of the local Métis communities. By integrating traditional wisdom, the report honors knowledge and practices that contribute to resilience. Its cultural relevance underscores the importance of aligning adaptation strategies with Métis identities and values. The focus on climate adaptation highlights proactive measures to address important impacts of climate change, while the overall commitment to resilience emphasizes is building a sustainable future for communities in the face of climate change. The Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment also enabled the development of a climate map showing projections of climate hazards for each MNA district across various timeframes and climate pathways. You can access the climate map through this QR code or on our website. Within the Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment, 4 elements represent climate hazards and how they impact citizens and the environment differently depending on the season. The first of the key elements we will examine is fire and how the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires are impacting citizens. The fires of season of 2019 and 2023 in Canada were unprecedented, resulting in large-scale evacuations and significant property loss that affected communities across the province. The effects of wildfires extend beyond immediate physical dangers. They compromise health by deteriorating air quality, which can lead to psychological challenges, even triggering historic trauma. Wildfires result in loss of lives, infrastructure, income within our communities, disrupting traditional livelihoods and cultural practices. To address these issues, some proposed solutions include reintroducing cultural burning practices and emphasizing the importance of culturally relevant fire-smart initiatives that support communities in navigating these challenges. Let's discuss how the report indicates that wildfires and other climate-related factors that intensify them are affecting air quality and how they impact citizens. Wildfires lead to compromised air quality, which has a direct effect on respiratory health and an increase in risk of cardiovascular issues due to smoke inhalation. Additionally, they can have adverse effects on mental well-being and elevate stress levels while also limiting access to the land around us. Furthermore, drought conditions throughout the spring, summertime, and even into the fall directly contribute to the occurrence and spread of wildfires. Which brings us to the element of water. The lack of snow and rain in these seasons particularly sparks an early wildfire season, causing mental strain for citizens amid the anticipation of associated impacts. These droughts also affect the land conditions, with dry vegetation creating higher fuel loads across the province, directly intensifying wildfires, thus impacting citizens' harvesting and growing practices, and in addition to gathering allowing for more frequent and intense wildland fires and smoke. Beyond the climate risk and vulnerability assessment, our department has developed posters and resources to help citizens prepare for a multitude of hazards. This is the poster and the resources directed towards preparing for wildfires. The wildfire tips poster is made to be displayed in community centers to encourage citizens to stay prepared, whereas the wildfire smoke resource, created in collaboration with our health department, includes guidance on protecting yourself from wildfire smoke, even with consideration for extreme heat. The wildfire preparedness resource was made to help citizens prepare, respond, and recover from wildfires, including infographics on how to fire smart your home. Each of these and more can be found on our emergency preparedness section of our website, which I'll share with you later. Moving on to an exciting new program to announce that we are currently in the formulation of an emergency management support team. On request, we can provide in-person support to citizens, connecting them with current programs and services provided by our government, such as the wellness program that offers 12 hours of free confidential counseling to citizens. Our government also provides financial aid to districts and citizens through the OMG Natural and Climate Disaster Emergency Support Program. This was initiated following the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfires and evacuation, and has since supported citizens through disaster, including the Jasper wildfires last year. Another initiative planned is to apply wildfire land management practices to our Indigenous protected and conserved areas in preparation for wildfire season. This would involve applying fire smart practices such as creating defensible spaces around structures, clearing deadfall, pruning trees, and planting native fire resilient plants, even potentially having the opportunities of bringing citizens out onto the land, all while ensuring that we uphold the conservation practices to maintain these areas for future generations. This photo was taken here from the Muskasea IPCA, which is located outside Mundare and is currently open to the public. Finally, here are some excellent connections and collaboration opportunities our department has made, starting with our connection to the Alberta Emergency Coordination Center, where we toured the facility and established a good relationship with. We also connected with FireSmart on the wildfire results shown previously for their approval of those infographs, and we have plans in the future to collaborate further. We also connected with the City of Edmonton, attending the Climate Partners Roundtable, where we provided input on how the city should approach specific climate-related projects, including one directly tied to wildfires. This brings me to the QR codes of the various resources listed in the presentation. Feel free to scan if you would like to find out more about each of those. I'll give you a moment if you would like. I would like to thank everyone who has taken time to hear this presentation, and for those who will be watching in the future. There's a great deal of work that went into each of these initiatives presented today, and I'm very proud to be the one that has the privilege of sharing the work being done for citizens. And also the incredible people who worked on these projects in our department. Thank you again to our host for organizing the event. And if you have any questions, I'll be free to take them now.
Thank you very much, Jacob. So we're going to move to Dylan, and then we'll take questions for both of your presentations.
No problem at all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I suppose I'd just like to start off, like Jacob, and just thanking Dr. Kermel, Rhonda, and everyone at the RCMR for the opportunity to present on behalf of Rupert's Land Institute and our Emergency Services Program. So as Dr. Kermel mentioned, my name is Dylan Turner. I am a citizen of the Otipemisiwak Métis government. I've been with Rupert's Land Institute for the last 8 years, and currently I am in the provincial projects and the Rupert's Land Emergency Supports Program lead. So for people who aren't familiar with Rupert's Land Institute, I tend to like to start my presentations with a description of kind of who we are and what we do. I'll kind of go through this quick because I have a feeling many people here probably are familiar with who we are. So Rupert's Land Institute is an affiliate of the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation with Alberta. We were formed in 2010 and we're assigned a triple mandate in education, training, and research. Just to kind of briefly go through each of those, our education department works with K-12 educators to provide Métis-specific education-related programming and materials. This includes programs such as our Métis Foundational Knowledge Themes, a 5-module course designed to help learners build more foundational knowledge about the Métis Nation, both past and present. Our early learning education child care training or ELECT program, teaching participants authentic Métis ways of being and helping early learning educators weave appropriate Métis themes into their early learning centers, as well as our Métis Access to Post-Secondary program or MAPS program. And this just supports Alberta Métis high school students on their journey to either a career, either focusing on that transition between high school and post-sec or any other relevant training needed to meet their career goals. And as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Kamola, our research mandate is fulfilled by the three-way partnership between ourselves, the Otipemisiwak Métis government, and the University of Alberta, which is the RCMR, and they do fantastic research and studies, as well as put on this amazing event every year. And then lastly is our training mandate, and this includes post-secondary education programming as well as our job search services. And so it covers everything from post-secondary financial supports through all 4 years of an undergrad and even to a few graduate level programs, career and professional development supports, short-term training, labor market-based training projects, job search services, as well as the Otipemisiwak Métis Student and Alumni Association. And it also includes our mobile employment services department, which you'll hear more about kind of further down, but essentially they provide itinerant services to communities that don't have convenient access to a brick and mortar Rupert's Land office. And they do this through their mobile office units, which essentially are RV units that have been converted into mobile employment centers, and they're complete with their own internal Wi-Fi, have all the same access to employment resources. You're able to connect with a Métis advisor or a job coach. So essentially everything you'd need in your community to access our services. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I will be describing how Rupert's Land Institute is contributing to the emergency management structure for the Métis people in Alberta. So over the last 15 years or so that we've been an organization, Rupert's Land has found itself in a position to provide supports to members of the community during some of the hardest moments in their lives. In 2011, during the Slave Lake wildfire, which displaced many of our people, as well as their neighbors and their friends, we were able to provide meaningful support to the evacuees. We provided a variety of items such as bottled water, instant meals, toiletries, and various other supplies, just stuff that people may not have thought to grab or weren't able to grab enough of when the evacuation order came down. Our staff in the region also stepped up to volunteer their time and help distribute these supplies. They answered questions from the community, and just basically offered themselves to anyone that needed someone to talk to or just a shoulder to cry on. And our mobile services units provided a central gathering point for the community members, a place where we could distribute supplies directly to those in need, provide Wi-Fi access for people to be able to access their emails, communicate with family, let them know that they're all right, and apply for any benefits that were intended to support evacuees, either the ones that Jacob mentioned earlier through the OMG or even the federal government. Unfortunately, in 2016, the Fort McMurray wildfire provided another opportunity. It displaced 88,000 residents in the Fort McMurray and Wood Buffalo area, again, many of which were citizens of the Otipemisiwak Métis government. And once again, we found ourselves in a position to be able to provide direct supports to those evacuees. And just like in 2011, we were able to become a central point for citizens to find supplies, access the Wi-Fi, and just a general source of reassurance that we were there to support them when they needed that support. Once again, our staff, we stepped up to assist, either by distribution of supplies, offering the mobile units as an administrative resource for evacuees to connect with their families, offering emotional support, essentially just, again, doing what we did in 2011. And then finally, in 2023, the wildfires across the province began in early May, and they just spread throughout all of the summer. And our mobile services team once again spent the summer loading their units up with supplies and began delivering them to Métis locals and other community gathering spaces in these impacted areas. But the fires kept spreading to the point where we actually had to find and rent a 5-ton truck to be able to run a third unit to deliver supplies throughout the Northwest to communities such as High Prairie, Valley View, Fairview. That summer, we were all over the northern part of the province trying to ensure that we were able to provide some supports and supplies for the community. And it was also the summer that Rupert's Land Institute realized we needed to formalize our supports for the community. Every study said at the time and still says the same thing: extreme weather, wildfires, and other natural disasters are only going to increase each year. We wanted to be sure that we're prepared to respond when needed. So in February 2024, it was decided that a standing committee of the Rupert's Land Board of Governors needed to be established to address this issue properly. So the Rupert's Land Emergency Management Committee was developed, and it was created to formalize these efforts in providing supports to evacuated communities, as well as to develop a long-term strategy to increase our ability to respond to emergencies when they occurred. So at that time, a terms of reference was developed, and it emphasized, amongst other things, providing support to the Otipemisiwak Métis government and its mandate to build community capacity to prepare for, mitigate, respond to, and recover from emergencies and natural disasters. So this process included short-term actions to address the potential emergency situations that could arise during the approaching wildfire season of 2024, as well as more long-term plans focusing on capacity building, job creation, and just generally increasing emergency services developed through a Métis lens. So the first step was to develop our ad hoc emergency support activities that we had done those last 3 summers I spoke of into something formalized that could deploy as quickly as possible when the request was made and the action approved. And this began with establishing the Rupert's Land Emergency Supports Program, which would conduct the same supports response provided in 2011, 2016, and 2023. So this meant finding the right team to research and report on what was needed to be successful in this endeavor and perform the legwork necessary to bring it to fruition. The process identified a number of priorities, which included appropriate training, acquisition of box trucks to deliver supplies, and a space where we could store non-perishable goods, which could be loaded and delivered within 24 hours of receiving the order to deploy. So obviously the first priority to ensure frontline staff on this program had the necessary training to operate under these conditions that would be present during an emergency. The 2 most important, which were the Class 3 operators training, just to ensure that everyone who was operating the trucks knew how to operate them safely while they're carrying out large vehicles under great weight through emergency areas, as well as our Incident Command System 100 and 200 training. Now, Incident Command System, or ICS, is a universal framework and language that are used by all parties during an emergency or incident. This includes all military, police, EMS, anybody who responds to emergency, and it can be anything from a car accident on a highway to an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And so being able to understand this framework is important to ensure that our team knew how everything was going to happen during an emergency, where we fit within that, and to ensure that we weren't impeding the response of the other teams that were actually addressing the direct response to the emergency. We also identified additional training as being necessary for the long term. So if we did expand eventually into something a little more direct response, we would want to have things such as the higher level ICS training, as well as the basic emergency management training. Now, the second priority was to locate a warehouse or some other storage facility where we could be able to stage all these non-perishable supplies. Fortunately, we were able to secure a place in the same complex that our mobile services units operate. It was large enough to safely park a large 5-ton truck, as well as 12 to 14 pallets of supplies having been assembled for immediate deployment. And these supplies, they included things, again, like instant meals, snacks, coffee, tea, diapers, toiletries, pet food, laundry supplies, and really anything that we felt evacuees may not have had a chance to grab when leaving their homes, but would be in desperate need of at the time while they're in their evacuation centers. So having secured this space, obviously the next step, get the trucks that would become the workhorses of the program. And we identified the needs that these trucks would have to fulfill under it. We'd want 1 truck that could carry multiple pallets at one time for deliveries to multiple communities in a single trip, and a smaller truck to carry a few pallets to individual communities on a very short notice. So in the slide you can see here, we have our RASP-1 vehicle on the left. It's a 1-ton box van capable of carrying up 4 pallets at a time for quick trips on short notice. And RESB2 on the right is a 5-ton box truck, which can carry up to 10 to 12 full pallets of supplies, making much longer scale deliveries into those evacuation zones. So since the summer of 2024, we have been fortunate enough not to see the same level of danger to our communities as we did in those previous summers, 11, 16, 19, and 23. That being said, we have deployed a couple of times, once for a wildfire evacuation. So in 2024, there were wildfires near Fort Vermilion, and this resulted in multiple First Nations communities being evacuated from their homes. And just given the kinship connections between the Métis families in that region and the First Nations communities, the citizens representative for that district requested that we do a run of supplies and provide assistance for those evacuees. And on July 29th, 2024, the deployment order for us was given, and our unit made its way up to those evacuees and provided those requested supplies. Over that time, we've also provided some smaller supports and supplies, not necessarily for emergencies, but just because there was a need and we had the ability to address that need. And so in December 2024, we dropped off some supplies, some food, some of the snacks and everything to the Renaissance Towers, which is a Métis capital housing elders community for those who are unfamiliar. And just this past October, actually, we were able to take some supplies out to the Samuel Bird Command Post in October of this year for those who were there searching for the young man. So with the short-term goal of formalizing our emergency supports program well underway, it was time to begin to work on the long-term strategy for the program. And so, as mentioned previously, our terms of reference for the committee stated our intention to provide support to the Otipemisiwak Métis government in developing emergency management services for our citizens. So when considering this, 3 things stuck out for us. We wanted to avoid overlap and address gaps. There was the lack of stable funding for emergency management for Métis people, as well as addressing any existing opportunities that might exist for RLI to contribute. And so, as I said, number 1, we wanted to ensure that we were able to cover gaps in services, but not to overlap or duplicate anything that existed or was planned by the Otipemisiwak Métis government's emergency management team. Number 2, again, as I say, is the lack of financial supports from Indigenous Services Canada and the federal government for Métis people when it comes to emergency management. And to kind of put that into perspective, in 2022, the Métis National Council released their emergency management report. And within that document, they identify that the Indigenous Services Canada administers a program known as the Emergency Management Assistance Program, or EMAP. Now, according to the report, as well as the Indigenous Services Canada website, this program is designed to provide funding to First Nations to, quote, mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies. These are known as the 4 pillars of emergency management. Now, as of today, the Métis Nation and its representative organizations across the homeland are not eligible to access the CMAP funding, and neither Indigenous Services Canada nor the federal government in general have a comparable funding option for the Métis Nation or its representative organizations. And lastly, number 3 was what opportunities exist for Rupert's Land to leverage our current funding under the Indigenous Skills and Employment Training Program to address the need for community capacity building, job creation, and increased emergency services for Métis people by Métis people. So from these 3 points, the Kiwichitanao Emergency Management Services, or KEMS, began to take shape. And so under the KEMS umbrella, we began with something that Rupert's Land Institute has always done very well, and that's targeted career training. We look for areas of opportunity in the labor market that balanced utility in emergency situations with relatively low barriers to entry in terms of the training. So jobs that we can train relatively quickly, but are also in demand, provide a livable income, and require skills that are complementary to emergency management. So the first project we ran was the Rupert's Land Emergency and Industry Skills Drone Training Project, or REISD. As you can see, this little stylized dragonfly down in the bottom left is the logo we developed for that program. It was designed in collaboration with In-Flight Data Systems, which is a Métis-owned remote piloted aircraft system, or RPAS company. And RPAS is the technical term for drones when you're talking in regulation in Canada. They provide training up to the advanced pilot certification. but they also actively respond in emergency situations for the province each year. I believe this summer they were up in the Fort McMurray area helping out with the wildfires up there. So in-flight data would provide all of the basic and advanced certifications, the flight review tests, as well as what they call restricted operator certificate dash aeronautical training, which is just essentially the certification required for someone who is piloting either an aircraft or a drone to use the frequency bands and communication set aside for aeronautics. And so this way they can ensure that their flight operations are not interfering with airports, aircraft, landing strips, or aerodromes, and it just sort of keeps everybody safe. This project also paired the RPAS certifications with other certifications that are complementary to either industry or emergency management roles utilizing drones. So this included the ICS 100 and 200, first aid, H2S Alive, common safety orientation, WMIS, bear awareness, and a couple of other ones that just, it helps develop that employability once they were completed the program. But we also included some entry-level information regarding entrepreneurial routes, such as relevant legislation to operating a drone business, relevant insurance legislation, tax implications. And for anyone who maybe didn't want to take the entrepreneurial route, we also included a course on developing an employability portfolio. Just this way, participants are able to effectively communicate the skills and training to potential employers. So to date, we've actually conducted 2 cohorts of this training here. That's cohort 1 on the left and cohort 2 here on the right. Actually, cohort 2 just wrapped up their final weeks of training earlier this month. Between the 2 groups, we've actually certified 21 advanced RPAS pilots. Some of these pilots have returned to their original company, but with new skills that can lead to greater earning power. Some either started or expanded to their own companies, and a few are now actively engaged within the emergency management sector. And the second opportunity we saw to build capacity within the community was in the field of paramedicine. So increased demand for emergency medical responders from industry, private ambulance services, and the Alberta Health Services made this an obvious choice as a training project. It would provide a stepping stone into paramedical services, as the EMR designation is the first level for paramedics, as well as build greater emergency response capacity within our community. Our partnership with Emergency Services Academy, which is a Métis-owned business and educator, actually provided the pathway for this. Now, with this project, the eligibility criteria was significantly steeper than a lot of our other projects because it deals with so much medical terminology, biological science, and physical fitness. So there was a long period where we were recruiting people for it. But in the end, we were able to find 8 participants who not only met the requirements, but were willing to commit to the 9-week training period. It's 5 weeks of virtual training and then 4 weeks of in-person. And as of the beginning of this week, those 8 participants have now begun the first of their final 4 weeks of training down at the Nigannon Lodge in Smoky Lake. And we have high hopes that 8 new Métis EMR will be joining the Alberta College of Paramedics once they complete their Canadian Organization of Paramedic Regulator exams in February. Now that's with the capacity building. In terms of the job creation, well, we don't really have the internal opportunities at this time within the CHEMS program or the wider Otipemisiwak Métis government to be able to employ them right away. We at Rupert's Land Institute are able to support them in their job search through just our regular stream of programming. And you can kind of see a list of some of what those programs are just here on the slide. It includes things like resume building, interview skills, employer partnerships, or further training as they progress through their career. One program is our employment partnership program, which is a wage subsidy. And that will play a crucial role as we move forward and develop greater job creation opportunities. So that's one we think is going to be very good and very successful at being able to build out opportunities for attendees of these programs. So I am cognizant of my time, so I'll try to get through this last few slides here as quickly as I can. So just looking to the future, we realized that trying to develop a program around direct response to emergencies was not going to be possible just using the funding under our ISET model, the Indigenous Skills Education and Training Program. And so what would we do to try to secure more stable funding to directly support greater development of the 4 pillars for citizens of the OMG? Well, what we needed was a roadmap for building out an actionable, deployable emergency response program. And so we began to look for organizations who understood the task we had set for ourselves, also had extensive experience in the emergency response sector, and could provide the information through a Métis lens. So who we found was Seven Integrated Solutions, a small organization operated by founder John McDermott. John has 25 years of experience as a member of the fire service in Canada, including as a provincial wildfire investigator for the province, which is his current role. But formerly he was a fire marshal for the territory of Nunavut. He was a deputy fire chief in the Lesser Slave Lake Regional Fire Service, as well as the High Prairie Fire Department. He's also a citizen of the Otipemisiwak Métis government, so John has the right combination of practical experience, knowledge, and understanding of the Métis worldview that we were looking for, and is the right person to build the roadmap we needed. And so as of October 1st of this year, John has been researching and building the report that will allow CEMS to lobby for the emergency management funding that is currently lacking for Métis people. We are anticipating the completed report in the fall of 2026. So without going into too much detail, I'll provide just a quick overview of the major deliverables we have asked John to present. So we wanted him to identify and build a framework for emergency management activation, resource needs such as equipment, personnel, tools, deployment procedures, and just developing the job descriptions for all levels of the emergency response team, which is going to include firefighting capabilities as well as emergency paramedical response. We asked him to identify appropriate certification and training pathways for these emergency response teams. We also wanted to ensure that we had sections for best practices, standard operating procedures, but not only that, we want guidance on how to develop and strengthen them as they develop in the future. But most importantly, we've asked him to review and include the necessary criteria needed to be included as part of the provincial emergency response program, which is ultimately the goal for this program. It's a fully Métis emergency response program that can be deployed when and where needed. So thank you, everyone, for your time. I really hope there was something there that you got from that presentation. And again, I'd just like to thank the RCMR and everyone in that team for the opportunity to come here and speak with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Dylan, and again, thank you, Jacob. So we still have like 15 minutes where we can take questions. And Rhonda, I don't know if there's any questions from our audience.
Natalie, there isn't just yet, but we'll give them a couple moments to type into the host and co-host.
Absolutely. I had one question, maybe for Dylan, because you mentioned like the complexity of getting funding from the federal government, and I'm just wondering if with the changes, especially the agreements, recent agreements between the OMG and the federal government, is there any hope in the near future that money is going to come in order to help with initiatives such as the ones you shared with us?
Well, I think there's always hope, as these are nation-to-nation government agreements that we will, the negotiators for the Otipemisiwak Métis government will include language that outlines, supports for developing emergency management. The line from the federal government is essentially that as the Otipemisiwak Métis government is not a land-based community, we're diaspora across all of the municipalities in Alberta. Therefore, all of our needs are met by the services offered by those municipalities. But I think that really ignores the cultural side of it as well. I mean, especially after listening to the presentation by Dr. Cardinal Christensen, there is a lot more room to increase Indigenous viewpoints into this process. And I think it needs to become a priority for the federal government to address that and make right on that when it comes to these nation-to-nation agreements. As for the actual feet on the ground, I think that's probably more something Jacob would be able to speak to with his department, as they work directly with the OMG, and I think probably be more privy to where those negotiations are.
Thank you. Jacob, would you have an answer?
I'm so sorry. I don't think I would. A lot of our initiatives are really grassroots level, so it's a little difficult to say when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I can also just connect with my colleagues here on that.
Okay, well, it was just out of curiosity. Thank you. And my second question would be around, because we talked about capacity building in the presentations, which of course is extremely important. But I was wondering, what about the capacity building of firefighters?
I can speak to that as well. We're very much in early stages at Rupert's Land when it comes to developing this capacity. We don't want to hit the ground with everything we got all at once, because then we're going to stumble a lot more. I know historically Rupert's Land has provided training projects for firefighters, especially wildland firefighters. I myself went as a regional manager in the southern part of the province. One of the first things I did was wildland firefighting training. What complicated thing was, around that same time, the province decided to change the standards of how you get trained for wildland firefighting, and it became more difficult to arrange everything in place so that you would be accepted with the standards required. Now we are working on a pathway as part of this report that I spoke about from seventh generation or 7 integrated services. There'll be part of that report is going to include the pathway to access that kind of training. As well as our partner with the EMR training, Emergency Services Academy. They do offer some of that training as well for the entry-level firefighting, both wildland and structural. So it is something that we're going to be working on as basically as next steps as we go forward.
Thank you.
And
Rhonda, do we have any
Yep.
questions?
Yes, we do. So I think this might be for you, Dylan. Who makes the call for the deployment of your units, and is there any standards that need to be met before the units can be deployed?
So essentially, as it works, each of the 25 districts within the Otipemisiwak Métis government have their citizens representatives that sit on the council. The community asks their rep and declares that they need support, or their community is evacuated and their representative understands that this support is needed. So they reach out to the portfolio holder for emergency management, who, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is Rep Oraletti.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Yeah, so they report to her, and then it comes over to our leadership at Rupert's Land. If that's the supports that they're needing, is the supplies, they inform us, and then between the leadership of the OMG and the leadership of RLI, if they decide that this is something that needs to be actioned and approved, it's just communicated to us, and we go forward. And when I say they need to decide, it's not a meeting where they sit around and waste a lot of time. It's literally just everybody needs to get on paper that this was an approved action before we can go out. It's more about ensuring all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. That's basically it. You make your request through your citizens rep, and it makes its way to our team, and then we're off.
Thank you for that, Dylan. I was thinking about, if I may pose a question into the group as well, in regard to that idea of collaborations, do you have some thinking forward about, like, what would be some potential future collaborations that you could see would help to align with the work that you're doing?
Well, at first for Rupert's Land, it's going to be a lot more of the same. A lot of what we're doing until that extra funding is secured, and we do find someone in government who decides that yes, we are going to provide stable supports and funding for emergency management. Rupert's Land will be implementing what we can where we can, and so it'll be to continue to find the organizations that are willing to hire the participants of these projects that we develop. And so it's going to be a lot about partnership building with these private contractors who are on the emergency call list by the province, to ensure that when we have this capacity built into the community, it's being used to protect the community as intended. So that'll be a lot of collaboration there, as well as I don't want to speak to Jacob's role too much, but the Otipemisiwak Métis government has developed a group where all of the representatives from the departments and affiliates involved in emergency management come together, or will come together regularly, to kind of discuss what everybody's doing and to make sure we're all on the same page. But I think Jacob's probably got more of an idea of what that's going to look like practically than I do.
Actually, I really don't, Dylan, unfortunately. But I have heard about that, which is very, promising considering that we're all affiliates and that we all collaborate in EM in some sort of space or another. And so being able to have the focus of that be brought in and, collaborated on together is high potential.
I had another question, like related to the deployment, like when, like there's a fire and then there's, like a need to support communities. Has RLI ever encountered jurisdictional issues with the deployment of support, like because Amy in her presentation did mention that sometimes it can lead towards some difficulties, and I was just wondering if that has happened.
Well, with the program as it sits right now and what we actually do on the ground with it, it's not a direct part of the incident command system, which is, as I said, the system that's actually addressing the direct response to it. This is what's called a support. And under that terminology, we're a support organization. And so when we're called out, the people that we're working with that do similar work are people like the Salvation Army, other nonprofit organizations that provide support to evacuees, or Red Cross that come in and address emergency situations, but not directly, more addressing the needs of those who have been impacted by it. And so there's really no jurisdictional issue from us. We're able, as long as there's a safe passage of open highways to get from where our shop is on the west side of Edmonton to wherever the destination is with the evacuees, then there's no issues for us to be able to go through that. So whether that'll still be the case when we are trying to establish a more direct response to emergencies, that's going to be harder to say. But at this time, that's kind of the reality.
Okay, thank you so much. Rhonda, is there any other questions? We might take another one if...
Nothing in the chat just yet, but people are welcome to type in a question and we can be happy to take that forward.
And Amy said goodbye because she had to pick up her daughter. Well, if there's no other questions, then I will, first of all, I would like to thank you, all the presenters, for their fantastic presentations, and also, like, I've learned a lot, like, so I hope that everybody on the call learned a lot as well, and hopefully more, like, work can be done around wildfires and emergency and support and all those things that are extremely important, and the capacity building as well around those issues. So thank you all. I wish you thank you for coming, also for the audience to be there as well, and I wish you a fantastic evening and a great weekend that is around the corner. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you, everybody.